Boris Johnson has hailed a revolution in social care, promising no one will have to pay more than £86,000 towards it in their lifetime. But is this more of a fanfare than a fully costed plan? Is the Conservative government prepared to tax and spend enough to solve our social care crisis? We'll be devoting the programme to the policy plans. And asking why Tory MPs along the Red Wall are so worried about it. And will it work? We'll be speaking to practitioners, politicians and political commentators. Good evening. Today is a watershed moment in England for this Conservative government and perhaps for what counts as modern Conservative politics. Finally, after many false dawns, the Prime Minister has announced a new plan for social care. But in order to do this, both taxation and spending will increase. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland already operate more generous social care policies. But now Boris Johnson has taken a big gamble. He's broken manifesto promises on tax and pensions triple lock to deliver on another manifesto promise to solve the ever-growing social care crisis. The justification for breaking both promises is the havoc the pandemic has played with the NHS and the fact that the deficit is at a peacetime high. Well, tonight we'll be examining what this day means for the older population and the younger who will pay the biggest price. The Prime Minister has promised that the money from what eventually will be rebranded the NHS and care tax will be diverted in 3 years' time from the NHS to social care. But is that a hope, a guarantee, a cast-iron promise? And even if it is the cash anything like enough? Well, first, I'm joined by our political editor, Nick Watt. It really was a gamble for Boris Johnson today. How did he fare?
Yes, and I mean, there were real concerns in government that this could have been scuppered on day one by Conservative MPs because it involves, as you say, 2 broken manifesto pledges and it creates the highest sustained peacetime tax burden in the UK. But there was very little public opposition today from Conservative MPs, and it looks like 2 factors have turned it round for now. So in the first place, the tax rise is mainly, but not solely, coming from people under the age of 65 paying national insurance. Older working people will pay this levy, and it will also be imposed on dividends on shareholdings. And there was a very big whips operation to shore up support. Now, one relieved member of the cabinet went slightly over the top and said to me of Boris Johnson, "This man is a god. He could sell ice to Eskimos." I have to say much more of a grudging welcome from backbench Tory MPs. A bit warmer, though, from the man who thought that he'd make a much better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson.
I think it is to Boris Johnson's credit that he has done this. I'm someone who's criticised him in the past for not going fast enough on social care reform, for not recognising the large sums of money involved. I think today he has recognised that, and although there's a lot to do, we've got to look through the details, we've got to bring out this white paper on social care, I do think we have to give a Conservative Prime Minister credit for putting up taxes by £12 billion a year to make our health and care systems better.
Now, there's going to be a vote tomorrow. So is there any sense of a rebellion building or a rebellion crushed or whatever?
A rebellion is expected, but on the government side, they think it will be small. Talk about how it will just be maybe a handful. And the rebels are divided. So there's one letter circulating tonight saying, we've got to vote this down. But there's another group, possibly around about 20, saying, let's abstain. And the former minister who's sort of convening this group is saying, if we vote against this tomorrow, we'd have to vote against it in the budget to be consistent. And if you vote against a budget, that is effectively a vote of no confidence in Boris Johnson's government. But there are real concerns in government about the Red Wall MPs. These are the Conservative MPs elected in previously rock-solid Labour seats. And I can report that these MPs are unhappy and they are talking to each other. One of them told me, I will now lose my seat because traditional Tory voters will say, why should I vote for you? You are now more left-wing than your predecessor Labour MP, because of all these tax rises. And then ex-Labour MP voters would not vote for him anymore, he thinks, because they won't like the idea of having to fund, as he put it, millionaires in the south to pass on their houses to their privileged children. And this is what this MP said to me: "This has been the worst day of my parliamentary life. I have been in tears." Now, the government whips in tears. Now, the government whips know about this. One member of the government told me the Red Wall MPs are now regarded as flight risk. They could resign their seats, they're talking about. They could switch parties. I do think that is highly unlikely, but there is talk of how they're going to soon be unwhippable.
Well, let's say he pulls it off tomorrow and that's all fine. Where are the next crunch points?
So there are two really big questions tonight about this plan. So the first one is, when and how will the focus of the money from this levy, which is initially going for the NHS COVID catch-up, when will that predominantly move to funding social care? Sajid Javid unable to give a specific answer on that. And Jeremy Hunt told me it is ambitious to think that you can put money into the NHS on a temporary basis and for it not then to be baked in to its funding. And the second big question, given the possibility that that extra funding for the NHS becomes permanent, is will there be more tax rises? Boris Johnson said he hopes no, but he was unable to rule that out. And then a big challenge for Boris Johnson tomorrow. If we can look at the front page of tomorrow's Daily Telegraph, it picks up on what I was saying there. The headline is highest taxes since the war. That is Boris Johnson's former employer, and they are picking up on this idea that this is a Conservative Prime Minister breaking a tax pledge to be imposing the highest peacetime taxes.
Nick, thanks very much indeed. Well, today was designed to herald the new policy that this government is going to achieve what no government before it has been able to deliver. But so far, we have very little detail on how it will operate and exactly how much money will be disbursed. So is what's been announced today enough to solve for good the social care problem? Our economics editor Ben Chew is at the Newsnight wall.
Yes, Kirsty. So what happened today? Well, you've heard national insurance contributions are going to go up to pay for a much-needed reform of social care. But to understand what that actually means, we need to delve deeper. And it's worth asking three key questions. Who pays? Is it fair? And will it actually solve the social care issue? First, it's worth dispelling some popular misconceptions about national insurance. This is not a tax whose proceeds are specially earmarked to fund health. It simply goes into the general pot available for all forms of government spending. And the same will be true, despite what you might have heard today about ring fencing, for the new national insurance supplement to be called the Health and Social Care Levy. Another important feature of national insurance, one not often fully appreciated, is that it is not paid by anyone above the state pension age. Now, this new levy will include working pensioners, and some money is also being raised from a hike in dividend taxes. Yet, given only 1 in 10 pensioners work, this new tax burden announced today will still overwhelmingly be borne by working-age people. The Prime Minister today said it was fairer than raising money through income tax because businesses bear part of the burden through employer national insurance.
Income tax isn't paid by businesses, so the whole burden would fall on individuals, roughly doubling the amount that the basic taxpayer could expect to pay.
But economists identify this as misleading. Employer national insurance contributions will, at least in part, ultimately impact the general public through lower wages for their employees, fewer jobs in their firms, or higher prices for their customers. There is no free lunch paid for by taxing business. Now, national insurance does bear more heavily on those with larger incomes. The government is right about that. But it is not as progressive as income tax. This chart that you're going to see shows the impact of a 1% rise in the rate of income tax and also in national insurance. The least well-off are on the left and the richest are on the right. The richest would have lost more as a share of their income through an income tax rise than a national insurance rise, the yellow line there. This is why many experts say income tax would have been a fairer way to fund the reform. When it comes to fairness, we also need to look at who benefits. As this next chart shows, the new £86,000 cap on lifetime care costs means that someone with, say, a £150,000 house and substantial lifetime care costs of, again, around £150,000 would lose around half of the value of their house under the new systems. but those with more expensive houses would lose a smaller proportion. For instance, someone with a £1 million house would lose just 9% of their assets, as you can see there. Newsnight understands that the Treasury expects the medium-term cost of this lifetime cap to the public purse to be around £5 billion a year, and a considerable share of those benefits in cash terms would probably flow to wealthier families. That's why some have identified this as incompatible with levelling up. Finally, will it actually solve the problem? It's important to note that only around 1.8 billion of the 12 billion raised in this new tax each year over the next 3 years, so around 15%, will actually go to social care. The rest will go to the NHS. And earlier today, as you heard, the Health Secretary was unable to promise that that balance would shift much after 3 years. Either way, those who work in the social care sector insist the new funding in the near term is not going to be enough to fill the hole left by a decade of underfunding. And experts are minded to agree with them. Put all that together and you have the reason why some think that this package, at least in its current form, is not only lacking in fairness, but also possibly unsustainable.
Thanks very much, Ben. Well, we did ask the government to join us, but no minister was prepared to come on. We're joined tonight, though, by the Conservative MP, Bin Afolaami, Labour's Angela Eagle, and Ian Black for the SNP's leader in Westminster. Good evening to you all. First of all, Bin Afolaami, you heard what Ben Chew said there. 15% only, 15% just now going to social care. It really is a tax rise to fund the NHS. So why not call it what it is, a tax rise to fund the NHS?
Well, we're calling it an NHS and social care levy. So it's to do two things. The reason why it's important in the shorter term to fund the NHS more is because of the significant catch-up cost that the NHS has because of COVID. And I think everybody watching this programme, and you, of course, will also realise that because of COVID, there are backlogs building up in the NHS. We need to improve and increase the capacity in the short term over the next year. After that, from October 2023, money will start to flow through to social care. So it's to do two things at the same time.
It's to do two things, but,
Yeah.
but the NHS is the much more pressing problem. Is that right?
Well, they're both significant problems, but the NHS is the more short-term problem because of the catch-up required after COVID. You know, we've got, already the waiting lists are starting to back up because of the COVID difficulties. We need to make sure we get those waiting lists down.
But actually, it may be that is a movable feast, and it may be that you don't get them down after 3 years. You may have to keep going.
Well, I don't think we'd have been very successful if we haven't got those down after 3 years. I think that the key is to use this money, and to the extent that the government proposals were criticised by Conservative MPs, and there wasn't much criticism today, but there was criticism, people saying, look, we've got to make sure that this money is used as effectively as possible. And that's why the white paper that's going to come out later on this year is going to be absolutely pivotal, so that we're sure that this money will be as effectively used as possible to bring down those waiting lists, improve the capacity in the NHS, and then move to fund the social care.
But this plan favours the richer areas of society. You've heard from Nick Watt there about colleagues in the Red Wall, one of them in tears about the fear that they're going to lose a seat. Let's look at your own area in Harpenden in Hertfordshire. House prices are what? 421,000, twice the national average. Okay. These people are going to hang on to everything, aren't they? Because the maximum they can pay over their lifetime is £86,000. So that favours the rich.
Well, it doesn't. It's equal. It's £86,000 across the country. Of course, I don't think what we're trying to do as a government, we're not trying to punish people for doing the right thing, being thrifty and saving. And yes, maybe having a house that's worth £400,000 or £500,000. I don't think we should punish people for that. What we're doing is, across the country, people will have a much lower cap on their what they have to spend on their social care costs than they do currently. And I think that's a good thing.
How do you feel about getting a kicking in the right-wing press tomorrow? Does it matter?
Look, politics is about making choices, right? And, of course, at times, at difficult points in the Parliament, after the huge difficulties of COVID, and of course COVID is still with us, it's not completely disappeared. It is difficult, but you don't not do things because you think that journalists will attack you.
But if you look at the IFS said that the income tax solution would be much better, much more equitable than going for national insurance. So why did you decide not to do that?
Well, there are a couple of reasons for that. The first is that national insurance is a more broadly based tax. It raises more money. Why? Because you get it from employers as well as individuals and self-employed. And we're also introducing a dividend tax as well. So people...
On shares?
On shares.
So it won't raise that much.
Well, it'll raise about £500 million, which is not nothing. And so that is why national insurance is a better option than income tax.
I wonder today, I mean, I know it was the kind of broad brush in one sense, but there was nothing about the 100,000 care sector vacancies. There was nothing about carers in the home. There was more about training and development of the workforce, but actually nothing about a pay rise for care workers, many of whom are on minimum wage, not even living wage.
Oh yeah, and look, we have not today dealt with absolutely every single problem in the social care system. Of course we have not. And that's why the white paper coming in later in this year is important. But in addition to that, we do need to work together as a society and say, we need to make sure that we get better pay for people working in care, more effective system, use technology more effectively, and make sure we improve that service, because money alone doesn't do the job. We've got to make sure reform comes as well.
Angelico, just to bring you in here, isn't the idea of £36 billion over 3 years, a massive injection for the NHS, something pretty terrific that you'll be voting for tomorrow?
Look, I mean, this package of reforms, we believe, is unjust, it's half-baked, and it breaks very solemn Conservative election pledges. So I think the first thing to do is point that out. When you actually look at some of the detail, in so much as we've been presented with it in today's statement, only 15% of what is going to be raised in the next 3 years will go towards social care. And actually, that's not nearly enough to think about solving a problem that the Prime Minister said he had developed a plan solving in 2019, well before the pandemic actually hit.
But obviously, as what Bim Avalana was saying here, that figure is going to increase after the NHS backlog is looked at. Then the money is going to switch. The balance will switch right over. Do you believe that's possible to do that, to switch the money out of the health service, which has been in the health service, to sort the backlog and then put it over to social care? That seems like a reasonable proposition.
It's interesting that Bim actually said that, because Sajid Javid refused to confirm that when he was asked earlier today whether that was the case. And the fact is that it looks like social care, which has been crying out for reform, is at the back of the queue again. There's 1.5 million people, according to Age Concern, who haven't been able to get access to social care that they need because government cuts in the last 11 years, while they've been in power, have taken per head cut 7.5% out of the money that's available for social care. So it's welcome to get more money, and we can argue about how unfair using national insurance is, as you've begun to hint in some of your coverage today. But we mustn't say that somehow this is extra money. This is just beginning to start replacing the huge cuts that this government have made in the last 11 years.
Ian Blackford, just coming to you. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are going to get what Boris Johnson calls the union dividend, which is an extra over and above what the divvy would be from sharing out the national insurance money that's coming your way. 2.2 billion to the 3 nations and regions over the next 3 years. You must welcome that, because it's extra money for the NHS.
Well, of course, anyone would welcome additional investment in our public services. But the fact is, none of the detail is available. But there's a fundamental issue here, and that is that national insurance is a regressive tax. And if you take what the Joseph Rowntree Foundation have said, for example, about 2 million of our poorest workers are going to end up paying an extra £100 a year in national insurance. At the same time, they're going to be losing the universal credit uplift of £20 a week. This is a tax on the poor, and it's a tax on the young. It's intergenerationally unfair. This is the wrong way to be looking at funding our public services. And of course, when you look at the impact on businesses, you can see that the Federation of Small Businesses have estimated that some businesses will see an increase in as much as 7% of their national insurance costs. This is half-baked. It's been done in the back of a fag packet. And quite frankly, the UK government needs to go back and look at this again. It is wrong-headed. They need to make sure there has to be an ability to pay. And that doesn't come with the proposals that we've seen from the government today.
But the idea that one argument for the national insurance contribution is that employees and employers share this. The risk is pooled. And you would probably say sharing the pain for society, but you say the risk is pooled. everybody has a stake in this now. That's a reasonable position to take, isn't it?
I think at the end of the day, Kirsty, tax has got to be fair. I'm not against an increase in tax and tax being progressive, but this is not it. And we had a promise from the government previously that they would work across party, and they certainly haven't done that, nor have they sought to work with the devolved administrations. We all want to see investment in our care services, and of course that's been happening in Scotland, as you referred to. We've got free personal care, we've got free nursing care, and indeed we have a public consultation, and there's the difference, a public consultation which has been running since the 9th of August. So this is a UK government that's behaved in a brazen way with these proposals that, quite frankly, are going to end up punishing young people, punishing the poor. And the example that you gave earlier on of someone with a home with a value of 150,000 runs the risk of losing more than half their value. Somebody with a property of £1 million is going to be left with their value intact.
But let me ask you, Ian Blackford. In the short term, social care is in the future, as we've been told, the reforms. But let's just look very quickly. The waiting list in Scotland for inpatients has gone from 79,000 to 97 since the start of the pandemic, and there's 23,000 waiting for over a year for treatment. You say extra money is welcome for the NHS. So will you vote for this?
No, because at the end of the day, this is not the right way to fund our public services. It punishes the poor. It's going to leave too many people in poverty. Yes, we need to fund the NHS. Yes, we need to fund our social care services. Our Scottish Government are doing that with the programme for government that we had today. This is the wrong way at looking at doing it. And to punish too many people, it's the Tories rewarding their rich voters, those with large properties, and doesn't deal with the fundamental problem.
Bim.
So there are a couple of things there. The first point is, this is national insurance is something that's paid by everybody who is working. The working pensioners will be paying this levy.
Yes, but there's very few of those. But that can't be a flagship.
No, hold on, but they're in work, and I think that's a very important point, that we are actually broadening the base of this. Secondly, the point that Andrew Eagle made about taking money out of the NHS, that is not what's going to happen. What we're effectively doing is we are accelerating funding that has already baked in for the NHS to come in earlier and faster so that we can deal with the backlog. It's not taking money out of it to go to the social care, and I think that's a really important point.
Thank you all very much indeed. Well, one of the main bones of contention today was about just how much funding was coming and when to social care, as we've just been saying. As Ben mentioned earlier, only around 1.8 billion of the 12 billion raised in this new tax each year over the next 3 years will go to social care, with the rest going to the NHS. The Health Secretary was unable to promise how that would change over the next 3 years.
I don't want to say, after 3 years it will be exactly this split. But what we do know is that we'll be able to certainly deal with a huge amount of the backlog of the next 3 years, and more proportionally of the funding through the levy will go towards adult social care.
Well, joining me now is the former Tory Health Secretary Andrew Lansley and the CEO of the National Care Forum, Vic Rayner. Thank you both for joining us. Vic Rayner, first of all, you've waited a long time for this day. Do you now think that health and social care is on an equal footing?
You're right. We've waited a very long time for this day. And, I think, first of all, just to recognise that there is now something that we can start to talk about and start to properly think about in the context of reform. But whether this actually gives us the funding that is required for social care reform, absolutely not. The allocations that you talk about, the apportionment of the money between health and social care, won't deliver on the very desperate changes that need to happen within social care, around the workforce, around achieving a fair price for care, around sustaining a social care that's fit for now and fit for the future, and very critically doesn't give us any comfort at all for the immediate pressures that social care is facing in the next 6 months. You might remember that on yesterday there was 5.4 billion announced for the NHS for the next 6 months, and nothing for social care. So not only are we not equal in terms of the future levy, but we're not equal even in terms of the here and now and the challenges facing the sector.
And what do you make of the analysis that actually the backlog will not necessarily be cleared in 3 years, it might be 5, indeed 7 years before it's cleared?
Well, I think what we've got to look at, some of the things that you can read within within the document as it stands, and you're right that we've got the white paper to look towards in terms of what that will look like in detail, there is a strong focus on the interconnectedness between health and social care, and the very true facts around integration, that you can't actually achieve a lot of the things that the health service needs to do without a properly functioning social care system, which I think is why it's so disappointing that we haven't got the recognition, or indeed perhaps the flexibility built into the local systems, to suggest that funding can be apportioned appropriately. The difficulty is, as you rightly say, once you've got that money within the health service, it will be very difficult to disentangle that. But what we need is a properly funded social care system that can support health and support people to live the lives that they want.
I mean, Andrew Lansley, from some of the analysis earlier on tonight, that Boris Johnson looks like he has pulled this off. There may be a rebellion. It would be a small rebellion, is the assessment. No one else was able to do that. Have you been impressed by that?
Well, I think it was important to recognise that the circumstances that have been disclosed by the COVID pandemic and the impacts it's had, particularly on the NHS, but also in social care, have demonstrated a need for additional resources, and the government is stepping up and recognising that that means a substantial increase in taxation. I think that is recognised generally amongst Conservatives and will therefore be supported. But I do want to really... in the course of, there were two things really in what the Prime Minister had to say today where I think I have a problem. The first is with social care. He's talking about dither and delay. Frankly, 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, Andrew Dilnot, whom I asked to lead a commission, reported in the summer of 2011. Only now is the government saying it will implement that, and it's not implementing it on the basis on which Andrew Dilnot proposed it, because the structure of his floor and cap were set at level would have meant nobody would be paying more than 40% of their total assets in care costs. And the cost at that time for the Dilnot proposals, I had estimated at £2 billion. Now, the government is providing less than that now. And the Prime Minister dismissed the idea that it would stimulate a private insurance market. And that was part of the reason why Andrew Dilnot was doing it and set the levels at the point when he would, to make it an insurable proposition.
I want to ask you, though, Andrew Lansley, do you have concerns that about this question, which is so unclear yet, that the bulk of the money will stay with the NHS to the backlogs cleared? Do you believe there can be any such thing as a promise that that money will then shift at a particular moment?
Well, at the moment, I don't want the money to be delayed for social care. I cannot see a justification for funding additional resources to the NHS now and not giving additional resources to social care now. And it isn't just about funding the Dilnot proposals. They are important, but they're not enough. And as I think we were hearing from the Care Forum, it is actually, we've got a position where, and Angela Eagle said the same, we've got a position where local government is unable to step in and support older people with vulnerabilities until they are really urgent needs. And they need to be able to step in earlier, or they will end up defaulting to the NHS, as we've seen over recent years. So that is additional resources, as well as the fact that we've got 100,000 vacancies, we've got tens of thousands of workers who may abandon the care sector to go to the NHS because of mandatory vaccination. We've got so many workers on minimum wage and unable to recruit and retain. So there's so much that needs to be done in social care. It needs to start now. And the Dilnot proposals, of course, were legislated for in the Care Act 2014. It can be done in April next year, not October 2023.
But just to bring it back to exactly the reality of what's happening in the care system right now, Vic Rayner, are you making representations to try and get this number, this huge number of 100,000 deficit in the amount of care home workers? How can that be addressed immediately?
Well, I think there's a number of things that can be done, and it's not just in care homes. And I think it's important to recognise this is vacancies that sit across the whole sector. But there's a range of things that we certainly are suggesting and recommending need to be done. And the first of those is about paying a retention bonus to those care staff. Every single other country within the UK has done such a thing, and it has been shown, and employers certainly feel it would be an enormously beneficial thing in terms of retaining staff. Andrew Lansley mentioned the vaccination as a condition of deployment. That is having a significant impact on staffing levels within the sector. People are leaving in large numbers and going generally to the healthcare service where there isn't the same requirement. So we certainly are thinking about, we need to get the government to think about delaying the implementation of that, particularly because they haven't even laid out some of the conditions around exemptions for that.
Thank you very much to both of you for joining us. Well, are we witnessing a significant shift in the UK's political sands? What might be the impact of the Conservative hiking of tax? And what's the public perception of what the government is planning? We'll discuss that in a moment with our panel of experts. But first, here's David Grossman.
Tony didn't manage it, nor did Gordon. And David punted the can down the road. Theresa had a bold plan, but lost her majority in part because of it. Which leaves Boris Johnson. Can he really do what so many previous Prime Ministers have promised?
I've done it, I'm on message.
The first problem that politicians have when they start talking about new ways of funding social care is that voters instinctively recoil.
When they first encounter it and suddenly realise it's not free, because around nearly half the public actually believe that social care is free. So they're then often very surprised when they find out that it isn't.
The next problem is simple and stark demographics. This is the population pyramid from 1966, the youngest at the bottom, getting older as we travel upwards. By 2016, the upper floors were getting fatter as more and more people are living longer. By 2066, though, the pyramid looks more like a column, with millions more of us living long into advanced old age.
Actually, if you want to properly reform social care, which means not just looking at who pays for it, but the quality of provision and the accessibility of provision and how we treat the workforce, then you end up with sums of money which are huge. And most governments have tended to think that there's more political capital to be gained from spending that money on something else like education or the NHS.
However, Boris Johnson does have one thing in his favour. Using a rise in national insurance to pay for social care may be controversial with economists, but not necessarily with the public.
Very many people still hold to the principle that somehow, the contributory principle, a belief that national insurance is a national insurance scheme where you pay in and in return, you get those benefits in terms of pension, NHS, and I guess social care now being added to that in some sense. So although most people who study tax dislike a lot of aspects of national insurance, it's remains the case that it's the most popular tax.
But polling suggests that most voters aren't really tuning into the details of policy reform.
They'll only really judge it when they look at what their wage packet looks like at the end of the day, if something happens to their mum, their granny, or indeed them, and then they find out what's actually available and what it's like.
So for Boris Johnson, this is a huge risk. Politically, few voters will feel like winners from this, and many could feel like losers. Then there's the not small matter of an election promise broken. Will the public agree with him that the pandemic means that previous assurances just don't apply?
David Grossman joining me now is Camilla Tominey, the Associate Editor of The Telegraph, Liam Thorpe, Political Editor of the Liverpool Echo, and Chris Curtis, Senior Political Research Manager at Opinion. Good evening to you all. First of all, Camilla, we have already shown the Telegraph front page, which is pretty uncompromising. You think this is the worst thing the Conservative Party's done, the Conservative government's done in a very long time. Isn't it, though, a sign that Boris Johnson has actually changed the Tory party?
Well, the trouble is that if you want to stay popular with traditional mainstream Tories and they turn around and question whether you've lost the plot over this, then you've got problems. And equally, I think it may be very well now to kind of listen to focus groups, people who clapped for carers and think that this is a policy that's going to stand the test of time. But if you're going to itemise an extra tax on people's bills that they're going to see next year and the following years in the run-up to the next election, and they actually feel it in the pocket, it's all very well kind of so-called metropolitan elitist liberals saying, oh, well, we don't notice really an extra penny or whatever in the pound. But what about people on minimum wage who do count every penny? And equally, this is double taxation for the self-employed. You're talking about people being taxed on both employed and employee income at a time when small businesses are really struggling in the wake of the pandemic. It strikes many Conservative supporters as anti-Tory. Well, you might want to say to an extremely profligate Prime Minister to stop spending so much public money.
Liam Thorpe, it is a clever tactic, though, isn't it, to almost go over the heads of MPs and go straight to the public over this?
Well, I mean, he's been shown with his other decisions that his MPs, in the end, they might make some murmurings about it, but they haven't really challenged him on it. We saw that with foreign aid as well. It will obviously give him the confidence that he can just go to the public. And for whatever reasons I don't necessarily understand, the public, in terms of polling, seem to be backing him. I'd just like to say that when it comes to the idea of using the pandemic as cover, as he has today, a sort of political cover, this is why we have to do this. I mean, that's just not true, is it? Because there was a crisis in social care before the pandemic, and Boris Johnson said he had that plan back in January when he was elected. But of course, he wasn't planning to raise any taxes then, so he didn't have a plan, did he? I mean, when it comes to in terms of the effect on working people, many people in the city that I serve and the city region I am currently based in will be absolutely terrified about the fact that they're facing a massive cut in universal credit next month, and then they're facing this extra bill in terms of national insurance. So that is not the party of working people, is it?
But does this show that actually there may not be, I think Camilla thinks there will be, but for people that you're talking to, there may not be that much collateral damage in breaking manifesto promises these days? People just kind of price it in.
I agree with that, in the sense that the people who have already voted for Boris Johnson seem to be sticking with him. I think that Brexit has a huge part to play in that. I think that for many people who perhaps weren't that, didn't get that involved in politics, perhaps, and they, for the first time, did so for the Brexit vote, they see him as the guy who delivered Brexit. Now, obviously, there are huge problems with that as well, and that is not necessarily the case. But I think for some people, they've priced that in. And if we look at the things that he has gone back on his word, let's not forget this is the guy who unlawfully prorogued Parliament. Everyone seems to forget that. That moves on. You move on to the next issue that he's broken his word on, foreign aid. 3 manifesto pledges broken today. And it doesn't seem to be harming him. I don't understand why.
What do you think? What do you think, Chris Kirk? What do you think about that? Do you think it will ultimately harm him? And secondly, on that, they may support the government over social care, but actually the envelope was opened today on the spending round, and there may be very little that Rishi Sunak allows to live in those envelopes over the next few weeks.
Well, I think to a certain extent the answer to one of your first questions comes from one of your second questions. I mean, there's sort of 3 options on economics. You increase borrowing, and the public are still very averse to that. They're actually very, very nervous about the amount of money the state has had to spend over the past year and worry about how it's going to be paid back. The second option is cutting public spending, and after 13 years of what the public consider to be over-the-top austerity, they're not supporting that. So that leaves you with the third option, which is tax rises. And that's why I think, at least at the start of this week, what we were seeing was overwhelming support for this idea of increasing national insurance in order to put more money into the NHS and social care. Now, the polling today shows that actually, as that's hit reality, maybe that has shifted a little bit, and the policy isn't as popular now as it would have been in the abstract a few days ago. But even then, the majority of Conservative voters still support the policy. And if it will allow me to disagree with Camilla on one little thing, because I don't think the sort of core Conservative vote is necessarily what it would have been maybe under David Cameron. Now, when you look at the polling, the core Conservative voter is aged over 65. If the last election had just happened among the working age population, Jeremy Corbyn would currently be the Prime Minister. So the core Conservative voter, the people that actually gave Boris Johnson his majority, are the retired people. And guess what? They're the big winners from this policy, and most of them aren't going to have to be paying any of this extra tax.
But you heard what Nick Watt said earlier about Redwall Tory MPs, one crying because they thought that actually this was really going to hammer them.
Yeah, I mean, voters generally don't like losing money from their wage packets, regardless of where they are. They're in the Tory shires, they're in Redwall seats. Equally, we've seen some Savanta Comrades polling tonight.
To be fair, the reality of the pandemic.
Over 65s are opposed to the triple lock change. Yeah. OK, so how many more people can you alienate? I appreciate, to be fair, the Tory demographic has shifted. But generally, if you're going to be claiming to be the party of low taxes and the party of business and the party of the taxpayer, that is probably quite contradictory to then claiming today, as the Prime Minister did at the dispatch box, that he's the party of the NHS. Can you be the party of all four of those things? Or is that just cakeism, you know, offering to be all things to all men, but actually satisfying no one?
And where do you think that leaves it? Sorry, Chris, come in.
No, I was just going to say, but I think if you ask the public which they prefer right now, they definitely prefer the party of the NHS
Right
to the
now,
party of low taxes.
Right now, yeah, but not necessarily come the next general election, not least if they are being charged more in tax and waiting lists don't come down significantly, or what happens in some constituencies when, God forbid, a hospital wing is closed.
Yeah, but £36 billion over 3 years is bound to reduce the backlog to a degree, and hopefully anyone would say, with people waiting for treatment, to a massive degree.
But then the other concern, of course, is how much of this money is going to be ring-fenced for social care and not swallowed up by an NHS that is always going to be in need of more funding.
Do you think if Boris Johnson promises that money goes to social care in 3 years' time, do you think that's a promise he'd keep?
Well, whether it's a promise he'd keep, the most important question is, are the voters going to believe him?
Liam Thorpe.
Well, you know, the problem is, do the voters really mind? They seem to not mind him breaking his word. And I sort of quite regularly find myself perplexed by the fact that the Tories seem to go up in the polls when he does go back on his word. We all saw that video of Boris Johnson speaking to business people, promising basically on his life that there would be no checks on goods going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. That, again, just seems to go away when a new crisis comes around. So he does seem to be able to ride that quite well. And I don't really understand why. I mean, I don't know why anybody now would believe any kind of commitment about transferring that money to social care. The Health Secretary today couldn't even say how much would be going into the system. This was not a plan for social care at all. It was a plan for the NHS with a bit of money left over for the social care if things improve. Yeah. So it's not a plan for social care.
Just 10 or 12 seconds, Camilla Tominey. 2024 is when it's meant to definitely shift over to social care. Well, 2024, I mean, is when there's going to be an election, the last point there can be an election. Do you think Boris Johnson will be leading us into that election on the basis of this?
Well, on the basis of his own political ambition, yes, but it's interesting that he models himself on sort of Churchillian and Thatcherite longevity and yet has done the antithesis of what Thatcher would have thought of doing. But then maybe that does play well with some sections of the public. We'll have to wait and see.
Thank you all very much indeed. And that's all from us tonight. Have a very good night. Goodbye.